Hey, welcome to Ed Talks. I'm super excited today to introduce you to a friend of mine. He's the CEO and co-founder of Gozio, Joshua Titus. Joshua, welcome to Ed Talks.
Ed, really appreciate you having me on today. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, I'm so excited about it. And I do need to make a disclaimer because sometimes my two worlds collide of someone who I'm working with as a company closely and my social channels. And so this is one of those situations, but I don't want to not highlight people that are doing cool things just because I'm helping them. So, anyways, wanted to get that out of the way so everyone knows straight up. And the first time we met was really through Gozio. So I hadn't known you before, but I know that you are an engineer. We're going to get into this engineer, a pilot, which I really want to talk about,
Yep.
right? And you hold patents.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool stuff. So that's sort of how we first met was through Gozio. And I always like to ask people on Ed Talks about customer experience. So like, do you have a good recent customer experience like in the last year that you'd want to talk about?
Ed, I thought about that question. It was a great question. And, I think one thing that sort of dawned on me was that what we've come to expect from customer experience has really been reduced. And the highlights that I thought of as I shared them here with a friend, she says, well, geez, Josh, that waiter doing that thing they did, that's kind of how it's supposed to be. But we celebrated it, right? That was amazing. They actually went and did this piece for us. So I think our expectations have been lowered a little bit. It doesn't mean that I haven't had some, and it doesn't mean that, at Gozio, we still strive to deliver that experience that delights people. But if I ask myself, have I been delighted recently? I have to be honest, I can't think of anything that's really jumped out at me. When I think of some that have come close, I fly Delta Airlines, and they consistently empower their employees to do things to delight the user, whether that's squeeze me on a flight to get me home from Utah, 3 hours early, 2 days ago, or what have you. But you consistently feel they're striving to delight the user, and it's something that sort of resonates with me in general.
Yeah, those are good. That's a good example. And I try not to answer my own questions because it's about
Yeah,
you.
I'm interested in what you have to say on this one.
But I agree with you completely. But I had this amazing experience recently. It was like at a Four Season or a Ritz. I can't remember which. I think it
Yeah.
was Ritz. And I was invited there by a company to speak. And so I spoke for this company to a bunch of healthcare CEOs. And at breakfast, I try to avoid this, but it looks so good. It was like a croissant that was glazed in chocolate in the color of the Ritz. So it's like a light blue, if I recall. And I tasted it and it was so good. And it took all the willpower I had not to have another one. It was so delicious. Anyways, after that, I went off on a run, all that kind of stuff. When I got back, they were just taking down the breakfast.
Yeah.
And I noticed that the tray with all those delicious croissants that were chocolate covered was empty. And I said to the young lady that was clearing up, I said, oh, those were the best croissants I've ever had. And that was it. I left. Okay. So there's a knock on my door about an hour later, and there's a gentleman there with a tray full of those croissants. I have no idea how she figured out who I was. I was
Yeah.
where, I just come back from a run, no name tag or anything like that. But dang, that was one hell of a customer service. So we'll
Ed, I
move
think we're staying at different hotels, Ed.
on. Well, trust me, I wouldn't have been able to stay on that hotel on my own, but I was a
Well,
guest of
that's
the
awesome.
company.
Yeah.
But anyways, what's one thing your parents forced you to do
Yeah.
that you weren't happy about then, but now as an adult, you're like, I'm glad they made me do that.
If the first one was a hard question, this is an easy one. I grew up, my dad designed and built fine furniture. And so I grew up working for him. So for as long as I can remember, first grade, definitely, I worked in his woodworking shop, and that moved from, sanding, molding up through doing finer pieces to designing and building furniture. So I think I really appreciated later in life. Then I definitely didn't. Right, I'm in Alabama. It's 98 degrees and 98% humidity, and I'm covered in mahogany dust. Right, that is not a pleasant place to be in. Great motivation for college, but the idea of attention to detail, thinking about things sort of in sort of 3D and how you put them together, what's an assembly process, and being able to visualize the end result in your head as you work towards it, and also understanding the satisfaction of a job well done. In
Yeah.
other words, what did I see recently? That, leisure sounds really attractive, or being lazy sounds attractive, but it's work that gives satisfaction, right? And so the idea of having an idea, working towards bringing it to fruition, and then seeing it sitting in front of you in the real world, gives me really deep satisfaction. And while I have circled back to woodworking, I was happy to give it up when I went off to college. That idea of working towards something and bringing something into the world that wasn't there before still excites me.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Tell us a little bit more. And you've already given us a little color on your background, but take us through how you ended up co-creating, co-founding Gozio. So what sort of inspired you this direction?
Yeah, I was out in Silicon Valley, and I was fortunate enough to end up at a company early on in that company's trajectory. Company was NVIDIA. We just won the contract to build the first Xbox, and I was fortunate enough to be hired there and to get to work on that team. And so that grew, and as you know, did well, and moved up through managing different teams. As that company grew, I got to grow along with it, and got to a point in my career where we were successful. The company was successful, but we've been successful selling first-person shooters and bikini beach ball games, right? That's what it felt like. And I really wanted to. I had a daughter who was only about 1.5, 2 years old at the time. And I wanted to do a little more around my legacy and what I wanted to leave for her. And so dropped out of high tech and decided to go take my engineering toolbox and figure out what I could do with it that maybe would clean up my legacy a little bit, right?
Yeah.
A neighbor leaning over the fence had just sold a company in healthcare and was chatting with me about the problems that healthcare is facing. It seemed like a really juicy area that is 25% of our GDP, so large and
Yeah.
chock full of juicy problems to go solve, and problems that, if done well, can actually help people who are having a crappy day, maybe have a day that's a little bit better, right? And so that's a great use, I thought, of my engineering toolbox. And so, against my better judgment, I jumped in with both feet and built some core science around. And the problem that we tried to solve to start with was these hospitals are huge. They grow organically over time. They're confusing. Ed, when you're there, your IQ, which is normally 150, is running about 75, right? Because you're stressed. Maybe you have some clinical outcome you're worried about, or some test results, or even at a children's hospital, you have your kid with you and you're worried about them. So not your best day. So if we can help alleviate some of that stress and make that day smoother by giving you a hand-holding process similar to a nurse of 20 years jumping in and said, "Ever going to the hospital together today? I'm going to ride along with you. I'm going to help walk you through this." Your stress level is about half of what it would normally be. So
Yeah.
that seemed like a good thing to focus on, and pulled in two very good friends of mine who are still good friends of mine, fortunately, as co-founders, and we kicked off Gozio, and we've been at it ever since. That was about 10 years ago, I guess, that we really we jumped in. So
Yeah.
that was the idea behind Gozio, is to figure out what problems we could solve in healthcare using the technology skills that we had.
Yeah. What are 2 or 3 things or accomplishments from Gozio that you're most proud of?
I think if we set out to sort of help people and not one at a time, right? We could go do things with our individual times, and I think that that's important. But to try to do it at scale, when I see our usage numbers, when we had our first client go from, I think, that about 60 users a month to about 40,000 a month, that felt great. When I see that we have, and I'd have to check the latest numbers, but 6 or 9 million interactions with people, that's awesome. That's not something that I could not possibly have done by myself. And it leads me really to the second thing that I'm proud of, and that has been the leadership team ability to attract incredibly talented people to help us solve these problems. There's no way we could have done Gozio with just the founding team. We were able to get people who are as smart or smarter than us to buy into the problem and to really help lift us and do things that we didn't think we could do. So really proud of the team for that, especially over the last 3 or 4 years when there's been such headwinds in healthcare. That we rose to the challenge and are still, accelerating. I'm extremely proud of the team for that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What are 1 or 2 things that you brought over from your last company? You mentioned, working on the Xbox, and surely there were some things that ported over that have helped you
Yeah,
launch a company.
it really, we got a couple of patents at Gozio, and they're centered around how to use, basically, by building the guts that went into smartphones, which is where I ended up in a video on the mobile team there. I got to see the greasy underbelly of what these things can do and what they can't do, and talk in terms of how to use the different sensors that are on the phone. And that really is the underpinnings and the foundation for our patents in terms of how can a phone, using only the sensors on that phone, figure out where it is indoors with a high level of accuracy, right? 4.5 feet accuracy. So that really sort of underpinned and kicked off what Gozio started doing. So that came over directly. Something that came over a little more indirectly, and this is more sort of something that I learned along the way that I think is really important for an organization, at least one that you'd want to work at, is this idea of intellectual honesty. An idea being that, when I come into a room and I say, guys, here's what I think we should do, I don't want all yeses, right? I want someone to go, here's why that's a bad idea. You can be honest about it, right? And I can say, well, tell me more about that, and we can hash it out. So the ability to have to hire people who have their own opinions and their own expertise, and they're willing to and able to have the headroom to sort of debate it in a healthy way is just super critical, especially if it's a company that you're going to basically grow based on innovation. So you got to hire folks who are innovative and are able to share their thoughts in a constructive way. So I think that piece was something super strong at NVIDIA that I brought over directly to Gozio, and it resonates with everyone that we hire.
Yeah, no, I love. There's a lot of leadership lessons there that we could spend a lot of time sort of unpacking, but it's really good stuff. What are some of the gaps that Gozio is filling in healthcare, and maybe any metrics that you would think about when are we hitting those gaps?
So the gap that we're really filling is that you have all of these amazing point solutions that are out there, but if you sit in the seat of a CIO and you think about, okay, I've got physician database over here, I have some availability and scheduling that's there, I've got wait times for my urgent cares that's down here, I've got an educational component that I bought from the Mayo Clinic or what have you. How do I mash these together in a way that someone will actually engage with them in a way that doesn't feel like a Frankenstein app with all these different disjunct pieces, right? And you're mulling over how to do this and how to get these things to work together, while in your daily life outside of work, you have these awesome platforms that are doing just that, right? You go to OpenTable, in a split second, you can find a restaurant near you with food that you'd like and save your spot for 6:30 tonight. Literally 3 clicks. Yet you can't get time in your doctor's calendar at the system that you're ahead of. So you're struggling with, this is not in our DNA to glue these things together, but how do I do it? And so what Gozio has done is built that foundational piece that all these pieces drop into. So you don't have to really make them interoperable with one another. They're plugging into a common foundation that allows you to have care near me. And we're going to go look at all the availability for you and show it on a map, along with the urgent care wait times, which is part of care near me, right? So to basically think about and how to do these integrations, and then doing it in such a way that multiple systems get to use this. And that's really the key behind Gozio, is that we've done 50 years of engineering so that they can plug in whatever their best in class pieces are. And if we go to a different client, it's different pieces, but everyone's got a physician database. Everyone wants availability and scheduling. So it's different flavors of the same problem. We solve that core problem. So for a CIO, we come in very quickly. And at that, as I mentioned earlier, that client that went from about 60 a month to 40,000, from the time they signed a contract until they had a mobile app with the pieces that they could operationalize plugged in and working was 10 days. So we can go really, really quickly because we've already got the plumbing in place. Yeah. We've got the analytics plugged in that's going back to the cloud. We've got the automatic updates ready to go, right? Everything is in place. We just need to drop in what's unique to your system. And to have a hospital team that's sitting there reading about what's going to be new and the latest APIs coming from Apple for the new iPhone, it's a complete waste of time and a complete waste of their expertise. Their expertise, in my opinion, should be focused on the things that they know that are specific to their catchment area and how they can best serve Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Miami, whatever it happens to be. Yeah. That's where they need to be focused on, because they know their catchment area better than we ever will. So we'll do the bulk stuff. We'll do all the plumbing. You plug in the things that make it special for your catchment area to delight them. Circling back to our initial thing about, what a customer experience we've enjoyed. That to me is a great balance. And with our clients, I think that would resonate with them as well in terms of why they chose Gozio.
Yeah, it's a common struggle, like you mentioned, and I know when I was CIO, definitely, a struggle to have it, that single platform sort of solution, but you don't have to, you don't have to do all the engineering yourself.
Right.
There's a platform out there.
Exactly.
I always thought it was funny too, and I know it wasn't just me that has the same experience, but even just the amount of apps that a single organization might have is mind-boggling. It's like from a patient point of view is like, wait, I download which of these apps from XYZ hospital?
Yes.
It's really confusing. So no, I'm glad you're definitely hitting a pain point, and I certainly experienced it on both sides, right? As a patient, as a family member, and as a CIO. So that's
Yeah.
really cool. I love talking that stuff in mobile. I want to talk about leadership. So,
Yeah.
but as we get into leadership, why did you start flying? How did that come about?
I think actually it's back to woodworking, strangely enough. We were in Selma, Alabama, which had a big Air Force base there. And I hung out with these guys. They were all 5'2", 5'3". So when I was really young, I thought I might be able to beat them up if I had to, right? But it turned out these guys were instructors in the Air Force. And of course, I wouldn't have stood the chance even now. But they were instructors, and we went to an air show, and they did something called a sneak pass. And this is where two airplanes are coming in from the right-hand side, and or sorry, one airplane's coming in from the right-hand side, and he's doing probably 200 knots. So he's moving, but not that quick. And just as it gets to stage center, two F4s come in, and they're doing just under the speed of sound. And they blast by him, go vertical, hit the afterburners. Your entire chest is just resonating with this energy and this power. And my dad says, "Oh, you know who that is?" As they went straight up, right? He's like, "Yeah, those were the two guys that you were working with in the shop yesterday." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that is where I want to be. Thank you very much." This was just that guttural experience of and the sound and the fury, just the whole thing. I'm like, "Oh, this is where I want to go." So for me, flying was where it was going to be, and so I fell in love with it at a young age, and ended up going to engineering instead because I had to get glasses, and that meant that you rode in the back seat. And then as soon as I had enough spare time and spare money in California, I went and signed up at the local airport to learn how to fly, and I've loved it ever since. So I've flown all over the West Coast, down through Baja. Me and a buddy who got a bush plane so we could fly into the mountains and go do adventures together. And he's actually one of my co-founders. So the idea of sort of having the nose pointed out over the horizon and having an adventure is really, if you can tell by the way we're talking about it, it really gets me excited. So it's my passion.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. It's something I, would love to be able to do someday. What's the hardest decision you ever had to make, whether it was Gozio or something else? But what's the hardest decision?
And I don't know. I think that's a stumper question. I don't know if I could pick one out that is the hardest. Certainly when you're making decisions that affect people's lives, whether it's to continue to keep someone in a medical condition or medical state, or whether you let them go, I think it has to revolve around life and death.
Yeah.
And I think those are personal to each one of us. But to me, those are the toughest decisions, and the ones that you, even after you make them, you revisit the most. So I think it's the ones that, and again, this is one reason I love healthcare, is that regardless of what we do outside of that, and as popular as it may be, or as popular as we may be on whatever platform we choose, at the end of the day, the folks who are actually making differences in people's lives around life and death, I think are the real sort of heroes, and they're the ones making the really hard decisions. And I'm proud to be working in healthcare and be able to play a small role in that, in a supportive role. So I think that would be my answer. And a couple of things come to mind in terms of where those decisions were tough, and you can imagine what they would be. But it has to do around with, why we're on Earth, and, decisions we make for loved ones.
Yeah. No, I understand and get you. What's the best advice you've ever received? Again, it could be personal, professional, but what someone said to you, like, really clicked with you.
Yeah, there's a couple good ones. I think one of them, though, it's and I've heard this in several different forms, but most recently I think I saw it. I think it may have been Thomas Edison. He said, opportunity is often overlooked because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the idea, essentially, as I've interpreted it for myself, is that you don't really know how the fight's going to go. You're not really going to have that aha moment unless you're in there swinging, right? So you can't sit on the couch and scratch your chin and think about this amazing thing you want to do. You need to get in there, and you need to start the fighting and understand and wrestle with the problem a little bit. And that's when opportunity really will reveal itself. And really not until then. You'll gain perspective, you'll gain experience, whether that's taking a product to market and getting it out in customers' hands as soon as possible to understand what the real world thinks about it, or whether it's just sort of an approach to business. That to me has been something that I go back to sort of again and again, is that, you know, just because it looks hard doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. And often when you get in there, you realize that there's ways that you can make it easier. And that is the real joy comes from too. When you look at a problem that is difficult, those are the most rewarding. So
Yeah.
Don't overlook opportunity just because it looks difficult.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
You know, one of the reasons that I had you on was you're someone who was in the, engineering realm, but
Yeah.
corporate, had this idea and the passion around it to serve in healthcare and leave a legacy, and you were successful. And so I know there's a fair portion of my listeners who are sort of entrepreneurial minded,
Yeah.
may be in the middle of a startup. You made that transition pretty well, obviously continuing to grow and things like that. What's one piece of advice you might give one of our viewers who's either thinking about a startup or is in the early stages and kind of struggling, questioning themselves? What would be your advice now that you've done that journey?
If you're sitting at work thinking about, should I do a startup? You should go back to work. Stop sitting around. No. What I would say is it's more difficult than you can imagine. I had very smart people pull me aside when I was thinking about that, Josh. The sacrifice you're going to have to make, the emotional toll on you, it's more than you think. And it's kind of like when people ahead of time, before you have your first child, go, it's going to be, you're not going to get any sleep. You kind of laugh and you shrug because you don't really know what they mean.
Yeah.
But they're right. Right. And this is one where the folks who told me it's going to be harder than you can imagine were correct. However, there's also more reward there and more joy, and you meet some just absolutely amazing people. So if you think it's a calling, don't be afraid of it, but do know it's a struggle, but it's one that you can derive a ton of joy from, and it's exciting. So I would recommend taking a hard look at it and making sure that's what you wanted to do. And if you do, then 100% go for it. The failure rate can be pretty high. You have to pick yourself up and dust yourself off a lot. But that's all good. That's part of the game. But the success when you do achieve some is super sweet. And if you can do that and help others in the process, then I can't imagine what else you'd want to spend your time doing.
Yeah.
So I would be supportive. I would also say a mistake that I made that I wouldn't want anyone else to make is polishing the apple. In other words, wanting to get something that I believe is going to be absolutely perfect before I ever present it to market. Huge mistake. We've taken stuff to market months, if not sometimes years later than we should have. When it finally gets to market and the clients out there go, that's really cool, but let me tell you what I really want. So if you have an idea, don't think that you have to drop everything and go start up this big company and before you ever know whether it's a good idea. Put together a mock-up, put together the most basic form you can possibly conceive of, and then, work to get it in front of people who are going to give you some frank advice as to whether that's something they would actually pay for or not. And I think sometimes you're going to find a receptive audience and you're going to find something that has legs and you're going to want to run with it and you'll know what to do. Or you're going to find that, you're not really solving a problem that is setting people's hair on fire. And in healthcare, especially, you have to set people's hair on fire. There's so much going on. There's so many solutions that are out there. There's so many different solutions being presented weekly that you have to focus on something where a CEO or a CIO or an executive at a hospital is keeping them up at night. This is a major problem for this system, because if you're not solving a problem for them, they're just not gonna have time for you.
Yeah.
That's my advice is don't over polish. As soon as it's good enough to show someone, start talking.
Kind of like an MVP.
MVP is a fantastic way to look at it. It's what we use internally. And just don't think that has to be anywhere close to done. 75% today is way better than 100% next week for this type of thing.
Yeah. Great advice. We talked about a lot of different things, Joshua, during our time together. And is there something we missed or something we talked about, but you want to double down on? I'll give you kind of the last word here as we wrap up.
Double down on. I think you've got me thinking about all the folks who are sort of on the fence, who are in different industries. Come on in. The water's fine. Don't be afraid of healthcare. It is slow. The sales cycles are long. but you have some fantastic clients. And once you have a client and you've done what you said you're going to do, they'll keep you on forever. So it really is a rich environment. And if you want to solve real world problems, there's plenty left to solve. So that would be my advice for anyone who's out there who's possibly in retail or in hospitality or in some of these other things that aren't typically associated with healthcare. There's room for you and we need you. So if you have the itch, jump in. The water's fine.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. And that's what I appreciate about you, coming over from this deep engineering, woodworking first, but then engineering background. Yeah, and, exactly. Bringing that kind of thinking and thought and design over into healthcare. I think that's what's been missing in the past. And so I'm glad there's people like you that are doing that. So thank you so much for being our guest. I really enjoyed our time together.
And I appreciate the thoughtful questions and getting to chat again with you. Look forward to talking to you again.
All right, that wraps up EdTalks.